fellow travelers, and welcome to Versus Stars podcast. All my loyal listeners, thank you for your continued support. And remember, click the subscribe button, everybody. It's an amazing episode because Hugh Howey boards the mothership. You know him as the creator of the Silo series of novels. Come aboard as we go traversing the stars. Hello, Mr. Howey. Thank you so much for coming to the Versus Stars podcast.
Thanks for having me, man.
It's totally my pleasure, sir. Silo is a fantastic series, and thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks. Appreciate it. Really thrilled with how it came out and how it was received.
So I always start with the question of inspiration. So it inspired your love of writing and who your earliest influence is.
So I've been reading since I was really young, like before I even went to school. My mom was a school teacher and taught me to read on like Dr. Seuss books when I was probably 4 years old. But it was when I got into sci-fi that I started thinking about writing my own stories. The two authors that really jumped out at me, made me fall in love with the genre and dream of writing were Orson Scott Card with Ender's Game and Douglas Adams with Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Oh, two classic, good choices.
12. I read those two books back to back and they blew my mind.
That is awesome. Those are two phenomenal books. So what was it about them specifically that you thought to yourself, either I can do this myself, or it just inspired you to just think critically about life, future, culture, as sci-fi often does as an allegory?
Actually, the way you asked that question made me realize something I've never really put together before. It's the why, like I could do this that hit me with both of those books. At the end of reading Ender's Game, there's two things about that book. One, the protagonist was a young kid, even younger than me when the book starts off, but about my age by the end of the book. And at the end, I read that the author Orson lived in North Carolina, which is where I was living. And it never occurred to me that someone who could write a book like that could be from my little state. I didn't have a very global view of the world at the time. I thought I really lived in the middle of nowhere. And with Douglas Adams, the way he wrote, it was the way I talked with my friends. Like we just had a crazy, wacky sense of humor. I'd never encountered a book that didn't try to sound like authorial. Instead, he just, as he would say, as a Brit, he just took the piss. And it really made me rethink what kind of voice you could have as a writer. So when I started writing my first novel right after reading those books, it was very much in Douglas Adams's kind of style, because as a 12, 13-year-old kid, I could actually emulate that style.
It's kind of interesting when you're talking about how you weren't a world traveler, especially at the time. You became a world traveler. Prior to becoming a famous author, you were a yacht captain, which I think is the coolest thing in the world. So where did the training come from for you to become a yacht captain?
It started on my own little sailboat when I was in college. I bought a boat when I was 19 and moved aboard, living in Charleston, South Carolina on the boat while I was going to class. And 90% of owning a boat is repairing a boat. So I was constantly just fixing things, improving things, and tinkering, and really made the boat my own. Like refiberglassed the cockpit for, so that waves could break over it and it wouldn't fill with water. It started looking very different after a while, and I think I was influenced by the Millennium Falcon, and how Han and Chewie just took this bucket of bolts and made it, better. And becoming a yacht captain was very much like that. I was often at sea by myself in big power yachts, barely understanding how they worked and whacking things with wrenches to get them to keep going. So got into a lot of crazy adventures. It was the closest thing to space travel. I think it's still the closest thing to space travel you can do, which is go to sea in a poorly functioning yacht and try to keep it going.
So is that something you're eventually going to write a story about, or have you? Because
I've written a little bit. I wrote a nonfiction series called Wayfinding about just some self-help discoveries that I made on my own. And each one ends with some stories. Actually, I forget to publish this. I published kind of a memoir of a lot of my travels in a book called Death and Life. And I've never promoted it really. It's just something I wrote for myself and put it out as an ebook. But it's a lot of the crazy like near death experiences I've had to see.
That is awesome. So as you're being this yacht captain and you traveled the world, you know you lived a little bit. I can't remember. Was it South Africa that you lived in for a little while as well? So now you became this worldly individual. When did you sit down and go, enough of being a yacht captain? I'm going to be a famous author.
I wish I would have. It's funny. I just watched a documentary about Arnold Schwarzenegger where he basically
That
like
is
saw a magazine
fantastic,
and he was
isn't it?
like, "Yeah, it's incredible." And he was like, "Okay, here's a bodybuilder, like Mr. Universe, who became a movie star, and like that's what I'm gonna do." And he did that at age 15, and then he went and did it. So
Yeah.
I didn't have that. I don't have Arnold's confidence.
Yeah, because I'm
But
gonna say for those listening, he said if I can envision it, I can do it.
yeah, and it's funny. Like I had the opposite. I could envision it never happening to me, and then it happened anyway. So I manifest things through doubt. Um, I When I started writing, my dream was to finish a novel. I just wanted to be able to hold it in my hand that and say that I'd written a book because I was such a fan of books. Been working in bookstores my whole life, an avid reader my whole life. The idea that like millions of people would ever read my books was not even in my fantasies. And I hear from people now that they'll name one of my books and say it's my favorite book of all time. And like two things flash in my head. One is like you must not have read many books. Like let me give you a list of books that are better than that. But also like what an honor to because I know what it's like to have favorite books of
Hmm.
mine, but I never thought that I'd be on the other end of that. So I never dreamed of that. I when I was a little kid, I dreamed of sailing around the world, but that also seemed like unlikely. It's just kind of the same at the same age. I also thought if I dug far enough in the beach, I'd get to China. So I wasn't very clever.
That is awesome. So you lived a life then of unlikelihoods from your perspective.
Yeah, totally. But it's also some part of me must have yearned for these things because I have dreamed of like sailing long distances since I was a teenager, and I've dreamed of being a writer. And I think never giving up on your dreams. Sometimes that
Hmm.
just means don't smother them to death. It doesn't mean that you have to pursue them every day and get angry at yourself if you don't attain them. For me, I always felt like I had time and I had the energy and effort. And when the opportunities presented themselves, I jumped on them.
So once you proven, because you said you wanted to hold a book and say, show that you're an author. Once you accomplish that, you've gone on to publish 20 novels so far. Once you did it, why keep doing it? What drives you forward?
Once I realized I could write a book, I was just addicted to the process. It's incredible that like a world and characters cannot exist, and then you not only breathe life into them, but breathe like an interesting life into them and a
Hmm.
life that other people want to get to know and spend time with. And I got addicted to my characters in the same way that my readers get addicted to my characters, and the way that I got addicted to other characters like Ender.
Hmm.
You create a character like Molly Fight or Juliet Nichols or Vic from the Sand series, and once you know them, you're like, I want to spend more time with them, and the power you have as their creator is like, all right, I'm going to send them off on another adventure, like really put them through the ringer. It's different than daydreaming because a lot of times when you daydream, it's like always the best things happening or good things happening. But when you're writing, you're taking something you love and you're like, how can I make this thing suffer in order to create an exciting adventure with it?
Hmm.
And I guess a lifetime of like blowing up my GI Joes with my Transformers, prepared me for that.
Oh, there was so much money now on the Transformers.
I just want to see where's the mashup movie or cartoon of that? Like my whole childhood was like, I can't remember which one came out, which one came before the other one, but it was an
Hmm.
hour of GI Joe and Transformers. And afterwards, I would open up my little suitcase that I had, and it was like full on U.S. military versus alien robots for the rest of the afternoon.
I guarantee they're going to do that because they're both owned by Hasbro, so it's only a matter of time.
Yeah, put me
I'm
in charge of that. Come on, like
someone's listening. They're going to do. You know they're gonna do that now.
I can write the hell out of that film or TV show.
That is awesome. If that does happen, that someone sees this and now contacts you, I get a thank you in the end credits. I'm just saying.
You'll be in the writer's room.
Oh, that would be a daydream of mine now. Because when I was a kid, I used to watch Transformers all the. I'm guessing we're the same generation, same age group. Because, like I said, for me growing up, I used to watch the original Transformers. Though I will admit, I like Rodimus Prime better. I'm one of the few in the circle who likes Rodimus better. But I used to love that. I used to own GI Joe, and I always had GI Joe toys. I did not really ever have Transformer toys because they were, kind of the really expensive ones. But I had so many GI Joe toys. I used to play them all the time. Never blew them up because I ended up selling them at yard sales, unfortunately.
Oh, yeah. I think I'm only kept like Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow. Like I get rid of, and I had so many. That's just where like all of my chore money went, was to comics and GI Joe characters.
See, my favorites of the toys that I have for GI Joe is Snake Eyes, and I have the Golden Head Destro.
Oh yeah. Oh, he was classic. He was great.
I actually love that character. See, now got me thinking about you're going to be writing movies in the future. But anyway, to go back to your career as a very successful novelist. So going to talk about Silo, or which is Wool, but was it Wool first, or was it always known as the Silo series Wool, or was it Wool and then it became a series?
Well, the book was always Wool. The TV show was going to be called Wool right up to the last minute. There was even a time where if you went onto your Apple TV, it came up as, Wool coming soon. But it was a very last minute change to call it Silo instead. Yeah, the first book was called Wool, and then once the trilogy was out, it just became known as the Silo series. And so there's like a box set out and things like that advertise it as the Silo series.
Now, what I read was that Silo or Wool first the concept was first a short story. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's like a novelette. It's this weird, too long for a short story, so I couldn't have submitted it to a magazine, and not even a novella. It's too short for that. Novelette is like an actual category that used to, I don't know if it still does, used to have its own kind of awards category for the Hugo and the Nebula. And it's the least commercial thing I could have done, which is ironic. Again, like it's the way I like unmanifest things somehow. I wrote it and realized that it's the perfect length for print on demand and ebooks, which don't care about length. All they care about is like, the customer cares if the price matches up with their experience. So I published it for 99 cents on ebook, and the little print paperback, which is 56 pages long, was like $4.99, which is the cheapest I can make it without losing money on Amazon. And I published them thinking like this, no one's going to read this. It's, just a kind of a little piece of cathartic writing for myself. And the thing I thought the least of commercially was the thing that went, hyperbolic and launched my writing career.
Now, what aspect of the short story survived the novella into being the full novel? Because the Wool novel itself is about 570 pages. So what elements survived into the novelization?
Every bit. So the first 56 pages of the novel is the original short story. And it ends, when you're reading the book, it'll say like part one, Holston. That part is the original novelette.
Oh, wow.
And after I published that, I started getting reviews immediately. The year that it was out, I learned this from someone at Amazon later. I was actually in the audience while someone at Amazon was talking at a conference, and they mentioned reader reviews, and then they said, and our best reviewed thing last year was Wool by Hugh Howey, who's like in the audience, and they pointed to me, and everybody turned and looked at me, and I was like, I didn't know that, and then I wasn't prepared to be singled out like that. But the reviews were just unbelievable. Like thousands of 5-star reviews came in, but the only negative thing people would write in a 5-star review was like, "Where's the rest? I want more of this." And so I had never had demand for any of my works before, and I decided, okay, how am I going to turn this into a series? And instead of novelizing the short story, I just wrote a second story to go after it. And the 5 stories that I told to tell Wool were all published individually. And at one point, they rushed to the top of the bestseller list online. There are the top 5 things on the sci-fi list. And someone, emailed me one day and they're like, I don't want to click on 5 things. Like, can't you make these one file? And I was like, fine. So for that one person, I combined the 5 stories and released what I call the Wool Omnibus. And that quickly, and then people started writing reviews on the parts of Wool, and they were like, don't bother buying this, buy the Omnibus. You're gonna love all of it. And so those 5 things like fell off the bestseller list, and the book, the novel, a collected version, went straight to the top, became a New York Times bestseller. And so it was, as you can tell, there was no plan. Like I was just like going along on this ride with the readers at the same time.
So all your fans owe a debt of gratitude to a internet troll who was too lazy to read them individually.
I I owe most of my career to trolls. Like another troll emailed me one day and with the headline 163 things wrong with Wool. And I clicked the email. Usually people just have like 1 or 2 things that they think are wrong with the story. This person had 163. It was such a specific and large number. So I clicked on it and I started reading their gripes, and I agreed with everyone. They were like grammatical errors and inconsistencies. And I was like, oh my God, I have to change all of this. So I updated the ebook, updated the print on demand book, which I did first before I even responded, because I was so panicked that
Yeah.
the book was selling like thousands of copies a day at the time. And I was like, oh my God, people are reading a terrible version of this. So and this is 163 things wrong over 500 pages. So I had to, and he had the location of each error as well, so I could find it. It was so meticulously done. And so I made all the changes, and I emailed the guy back and I was like, what do I owe you for this? Like, I need an editor. I don't want to, will you edit my next book? And he was like, no, you can't pay me. I'm just like a reader who gets annoyed when things are wrong. I was like, well, you're my editor now. His name's David Gatewood. And I started paying him to edit all my books, which I do to this day. And I started telling all my writer friends, like, you should use this guy. And he was a banker. He didn't have the free time to be doing this. And he had so much demand all of a sudden that he was like, okay, what do I charge to replace my banking job? And now he's a full-time stay-at-home editor with his family, and he's one of the best in the business.
Oh,
And
damn.
yeah. So, hey, trolls, don't listen to everybody. Just keep doing what you're doing. Things turn out. You're doing great.
That's crazy. Because most people, when they get a troll, they get knocked on their ass a little bit. I remember this one troll I had on made a comment on one of my shows of my podcast, and it freaked me out for like a day. I was like, I don't know what to do about this. But you're like, let's hire that guy. That's such a different perspective on trolling.
Hire him, put him to work.
That is awesome. Now, I think the thing that fascinates me the most about Wool, and I guess maybe you've answered it by how you actually wrote it, is that I'm trying to think the best way to phrase it. You have multiple false protagonists on some level in the novel and the series as well, where first you think it's in the novel, first you think it's going to be Holston's the main character, then it's clearly not him. Then you have the mayor Johns as the protagonist. Then it's clearly not her. And then you get to Juliet, who's the protagonist. I mean, to me, that seemed extremely risky because on one hand, it's unknown because if a reader really loves one of the characters, like I really love Holston, I really love Mayor Johns. Like these are great characters. Then absolutely you kill them off. I'm like, motherfucker. Yeah. And then so on the one hand, that's risky, but on the other hand, I thought to myself, that's ingenious because now obviously every character is up in the air of whether or not they'll survive because you apparently like to kill off your main characters. So what was the reasoning behind that approach?
Well, I lucked into it. When I wrote the first novelette, I didn't think there'd be more, so I was able to kill people off. And then when people asked for more, I didn't have anyone in that first novelette that I really wanted to run a whole trilogy with. So I had to invent a character who didn't exist in that first book, but I needed to transition to them with existing characters. And I needed to really put the silo in turmoil. And I thought getting rid of Johns and Marnes after Holston's cleaning would be you know, create like a bit of a state of crisis for the silo.
Hmm.
So that was the thinking. But and then also thought, okay, if I take this Juliet character, if I can make people fall in love with her, which is part of your job as a writer, make people fall in love with your protagonist as quickly as possible, and as deeply as possible, while keeping them flawed. That's kind of my goal with a protagonist.
Hmm.
If I can make them fall in love with her, and then they're sure when I send her out to clean that she's dead, that will be agony. And that's kind of one of my like guiding principles as a writer is like what will create reader agony.
Like I said, you did such a phenomenal job. And one aspect, obviously, of the novel, obviously, is that it's a dystopian novel. When you're thought about the dystopian elements of the story, do you consider it more the Big Brother style oppression aspect of the story, or is it the devastation to the outside world that makes it more interesting dystopian novel for you?
For me, it's the Big Brother aspect and how do we govern each other? Because the it's always fascinating to me that people get really fixated on the outside world's inhospitable. So is the outside of this very thin skim of air around this planet that we live on. Like, there's not. I love the background of your video there,
Oh,
showing
thank
how
you.
thin the atmosphere is. Like, we're stuck here, and any fantasy of living on Mars is a fantasy. Like, we're not cut out to live up there, and most of what we have here is inhospitable, and it's becoming less and less so. If you're following like the heat waves and things going on, and it's um, we are in the silo together, and how we govern ourselves here is the fascinating thing to me. So I love that people are like, and the series does get into what happened to the outside world, and it is pretty. I think it's pretty unique to the genre and more realistic than other things. I think it's very fascinating conspiracy, but I'm much more interested in like how do we balance between Hobbes's idea of a Leviathan and Rousseau's idea of noble savages? Where's the compromise? And that was the big question I had while I was writing the series. Like, how do you mix truth and pragmatism?
Hmm.
And that's it's going to be the challenge. You especially see with the second half of the novel and season 2 of the TV show.
Now, another interesting aspect is how the silos operate, or the two main functions that or elements in the silo. You have the mechanical, is on the one side, and you have IT on the other side. Now, they both are fixated with machines. One is keeping the generator and keep people alive. One is being used exteriorly to control people. So one's giving life, one's kind of taking away life. Was that an intentional metaphor or parallel against each other?
Yeah, the way I think of them, I thought of mechanical as the heart of the silo, and IT is the brain. One's a machine, is a thinking machine. Just the wiring and the neurons have a very easy metaphor, and the other is like the circulation, like keeping the body alive. And the similarities to the metaphor goes a little deeper than that. I mentioned Hobbes and Rousseau earlier. IT is Hobbes, the idea that you have to have this strong, central, powerful government to keep people in line.
Hmm.
That's what leads to totalitarianism. And Rousseau thought if you just let everyone be free, we'd all get along and things would work out fine. And that's kind of the laissez-faire, um, uh, you know, philosophy of mechanical that leads to anarchy. So between anarchy and totalitarianism, you have whatever we live in now, and almost every country on earth is in between those two extremes, but
Hmm.
some lean one more way than the other. And yeah, so that metaphor runs very deep, and it's very. I mean, if you look at the layers of the silo and a lot of the terminology, like I'm trying to do what um, Orwell and Huxley and those guys were doing with their dystopia, where you tell an exciting story, but if you want to start teasing it apart, there's a whole lot of hidden meaning there.
I do think it's fascinating. I mean, with IT being the brain, so if the brain is allowed to if we focus, if we take away the heart and we just have a brain that's unchecked, is that where the danger comes in? Is the brain inherently then paranoid, controlling, and everything else, in your opinion?
Yeah, well, I think the brain is just without the when a heart stands in for like all the glands and hormones and emotions, which those emotions are registered in the brain. So it's not a perfect biological metaphor if you're a monist who believes that the mind is part of the brain. But yeah, the brain is like a very logical, cold, hard, calculating, and feeling representation of our body, and the heart is like the passion and the like just do what do what you feel and then think about it later maybe. And those two are really at war with each other. That's a lot of our lives are spent between wrestling with what we want to do with our emotions, and our frontal lobe saying like maybe that's not a good idea, or our frontal lobe saying like come on, like let's go hit the gym, and our heart being like I kind of like just want to lay on the sofa and watch this one more episode. So there's a conflict there for how to govern ourselves, and the metaphor is really strong for how we govern in society. Whether we can do like a planned economy and like be very calculating with like how we're going to delegate things, and then the other idea of just like hey, just like the less rules the better off we are.
Mm.
And there's a little complexity in the modern world with left and right politics, in that right-wing politics are often totalitarian and very constricting, but there's kind of a movement in right-wing politics to play lip service to liberty while being very controlling. And there's a movement in the left to be like, we just need to be free, but like meanwhile here's all the regulations and the way we need to do that. So we're in a really weird space right now where I think people don't understand what their political system's supposed to be, and they just kind of pay lip service to what their tribe says for in grouping and out grouping purposes.
I agree with you 100% on that, and I think an interesting character in the story is Juliet, as she should be, as your primary protagonist. She lives, obviously, to use the metaphor, she works in the heart, in mechanical, but she's a little standoffish. Though you do find more that she did have a love. She does have a affection for Lucas, but she is introduced initially as being kind of a somewhat colder personality as well. But at the
Yeah.
same time, though, she builds these deep relationships with people in mechanical, whether or not she's actually doing it or not. So, in your opinion, is this something about her that's inherently likable, and she just is like blocking that off? Is it just because she's so good at something that people connect to her? What is her, to go with that metaphor? How does she fit into the heart?
Yeah, well, she's from the mids, so she's not she's not meant to be in mechanical, but she ends up there because she's running from her problems. And I think that's what makes her closed off, is the idea that she thinks problems are meant to be avoided. Meanwhile, machines are meant to be repaired.
Hmm.
And her likability definitely comes from how good she is at her job. The other mechanics just can't help but fall in line with her, even more in the book than in the show. In the show, she's a little more aggressive, and there's more conflict because it's more exciting on screen. But in the book, you see that people really look up to her. She runs, third shift. She has people who work underneath her, and she's, very, very highly regarded. And it's kind of legends of her as you get to know her in the book, as they're traveling, as Johns and Marnes are driving on the silo. They're already hearing like all these incredible legends of this person. Um, but she's kind of meant to be not of either one of these schools, that she's been influenced by both of them. And Lucas, who comes from IT and who she falls in love with, really kind of directs her into a middle ground. He's really torn in between working in IT and being in love with a mechanic, and his influence on her and her experience, outside of the silo, which is, just everyone who's seen the first season knows that happens, but don't want to spoil the second season. But her experiences there are going to really influence her away from the purely mechanical point of view.
So, obviously, Juliet is a survivor. Is she a survivor more because of her resourcefulness, or because of the connections that she's made in mechanic? Because I mean, well, people have seen the show. I mean, it's already been out, and people know the book kind of follows a little bit in which in the book it's Walker, but she survives because of the help mechanical and gives her through supply to make sure she's given what she needs to survive, which is due to connections. However, in many ways she can be viewed as as resourceful. So, what do you think is the greater survival method that she's utilizing?
Well, she would definitely die without her connections to people. Like her suit would have failed her, and she wouldn't have survived had they not figured out that these suits are made to fail, and then
Mm,
and given her the tools she needed to survive out there. But anyone else who walked out there and saw what they saw wouldn't put together. There's even more clues in the book about why she understood not to believe her visor, what she learned from Scotty and characters who don't even exist in the TV show. And so it's her ingenuity that said, oh my God, like they've given me some time.
mm.
What am I going to do at that time? And how she survives after that is 100% her own ingenuity. And I like that she doesn't rely just on herself, and that she's
Mm.
also not kind of a pawn in someone else's uh, game. That she has these personal connections, but in the end, it comes down to a mix of those bonds and her not just ability, but her will to survive.
So in your book, you mentioned that Juliet realizes connection between the machine she's repairing and then when she's the sheriff, society as a machine itself. So the generator, she points out, gives life to the silo. So if machines all have a purpose like that, how does she view the purpose then of the society that she lives in?
I think this is something she has to come to over time. When we meet her in the book and in the TV show, I don't know that she thinks society has much purpose. She's pretty cynical. There's very few people that she has a connection with, and to the point that, like, if bad things were happening to people other than the silo, I don't think she would pay much attention to them, and that's probably true
Mm,
of a lot of the mechanics, and it's definitely true. Almost everyone up top wouldn't care what happened to the mechanics. They just,
mm.
would probably get upset if the power went out. Um, but I think what's interesting is like the way her positions change over time in the story. Becoming sheriff puts her in charge of people's security. Later in the novel, she has another role that's even more intense that requires her to care even more about the welfare of the people. So it's something that she doesn't have when we meet her that's thrust upon her. And I think by the time we see the full maturation of this process, she understands that the machines are not nearly as important as the people. That if there's a
Mm.
way for the people to exist without the machines, they would. And that not to spoil too much, but that idea motivates the rest of the trilogy in a lot of ways.
Now, one big difference between Silo the series and Wool the novel seems to be the focus on relics. So, why does relics become a bigger deal in Silo the series than it is in Wool the book? And how do you think that impacts how the story was presented?
Yeah, I think the writers' room wanted to heighten the mystery of the silo and its origin, and they wanted to have physical representations of that, something you could see, something put on camera, something
Mm,
people could chase down or find, in an upturned room. A lot of the mysteries in the book are secrets discovered on computer drives or in files or
mm,
through conversation. And one of the things you want to do when you adapt internal, you know, monologue in a book to a screen is make things more physical. So you need more
mm.
action sequences. You need more interpersonal conflict. So you can have people grinding against each other verbally and physically, and giving a physical representation of this mystery of the silo just became really attractive to the writers.
Another part of the book I hadn't even thought of until I read the Q&A in the back of the book. And I was like, oh, I didn't even think about it. The lack of elevators. And I thought to myself, for some reason, I read the book and it hadn't even occurred to me. And I watched the movie, the TV series, it didn't occur to me. And I read the Q and I was like, damn it, there aren't elevators in this entire silo. And now, obviously, the reasoning is to you said you point out in the answer is to limit communication across levels. So, in your opinion, why is communication why is that the most dangerous aspect from the IT point of view of the silo?
Because the only way the people in power can lose their power is if we combine our power. Like we people who aren't in the upper echelon don't wield as much power. And if you look at human history, it requires revolutions. You've had
Mm,
kings and queens toppled because serfs and shopkeepers and people in the lower class and middle class and whatever way it existed back then, the merchant class, banded together. And there's nothing the wealthiest person in the world or the biggest uh, billionaire couldn't do anything if every human just decided to like walk their direction.
mm,
And the time that I was writing the books, the revolutions in Syria and Egypt that were happening were kind of highlighting that social media um, was this really powerful tool for getting people together.
mm. So in the world of silo, when if you think if an elevator existed and the floors could talk to each other more often, a mechanical, the up top, the bottom, do you think inherently the up top would be tighter or acknowledged down deep mechanical, or do you think classism is just how it is and that they wouldn't still want to interact on that level?
Um, I think the classes would want to separate themselves. We're naturally tribal. Like we definitely want to create divisions and have our little in groups and out groups. So I think that would happen no matter what. I think the designers of the silo just realized if we can exacerbate that, use it to our advantage, more power for us, which is a lot of what we see in our own politics, where creating divisions lets them, do very selfish things for them for both parties, so they
Yeah.
can enrich themselves because we're too busy fighting with each other.
I do love that. That's another parallel. That's I think one of the reasons the book is so fantastic. It really is a great allegory for how the society functions, at least or dysfunctions. Maybe is the better phrase. Maybe also society dysfunctions. Now going a little bit back to Silo the series. My understanding then is season 2 going to follow the back half of Wool.
Yeah, exactly. So the two seasons will basically tell the novel, the novel of Wool together.
Now, obviously, the series diverges quite a bit from Wool. So, is the diversion going to become deeper, or does it start kind of coming back towards the book as the next back half of the book starts getting discussed?
Yeah, I mean, if you've read the books, you'll see so much similarities with the major plot beats. The some of the things people are complaining about, I'm really enjoying because that like especially Lucas like getting sent off to the mines, which doesn't happen in the books. I think most
Mm,
people watching this have seen the show and I'm not spoiling too much from the book here, but um, we love torturing viewers with stuff like that because in the second season we're gonna satisfy a lot of the people who are like upset now, so that's fun. I love the places it's gonna diverge. There's certain things that are just stronger by tell the story in a different way. So some of the people who seem safe might not be, and some of the people who seem doomed might not be. And I want to leave readers guessing. I don't want them to think that they have all the answers.
so obviously, it's getting it Silo the series probably took a hit like everything has because of the writer's strike, because of the Actors Guild strike. How far into filming or scripting was the series before these strikes occurred?
All the scripting's done. Probably over half the season's been filmed, maybe 60%, 70% of the way through. So I'm not sure if we'll probably be able to do some filming with other like little bits don't require characters. I'm not sure that we've shut down yet. But hopefully the SAG strike doesn't go on too long and
Yeah.
we can wrap it up. But I think we probably only had a couple of months uh, of filming left. So my hope we were planning on, I think, releasing this next year, and I hope we can still stick to that.
If this artist actor strike takes longer than, well, at least goes on or endures, is there a possibility of the series that's been shot to be released before it's completed?
So what's been shot so far to be released? I don't think so. Like, I don't think they would break it up into two parts, and everything's shot out of order. But usually, in this case, we shot in order quite a bit because of set dressing concerns. Um, so we probably could put the first, episodes together if we had to, but I don't think we would ever want to. The season really needs to come out together, and um, I mean, if this strike drags on for 6 months, it's apocalyptic for the whole industry, and I'll be worrying about a lot more than just my TV show. But even if that were to happen, it's a 6 month delay for us. But there's other things that we can do during that time. We can start doing some posts and some FX stuff and sound and music and things that have to get done anyway. So it probably wouldn't be a 1-to-1 delay. But my concern right now is like getting parties back together and having reasonable discussions so that we can resolve this and get people back to work.
I think everyone agrees because and it's unfortunate that something like this will continue because, like I said, the longer it goes on, the more damage is going to get caused. And unfortunately, the ones on the other side of the strike, the corporations, things of that nature, are going to be able to hold out way longer because they have the deepest pockets to afford to let it continue. Unfortunately,
yeah, they do. But a lot of the writers who are striking have to have other jobs. Like, very few are making a livable wage from. It's part of the reason there's a strike happening. So the the majority are not paying the bills on what was happening before. So I think both sides are probably going to be surprised by how long they each could draw this out. And I think that's why the sides aren't talking, and they're really so far apart and being really unreasonable.
But going back a little bit to TV, though, you also have one of your books, Beacon 23, is being made into a series. Is that supposed to be streaming or cable?
Good question. We filmed 2 seasons, and the first person, it's AMC has the second streaming window for that. So it'd come out on their streaming platform, but the company that had the first streaming rights went out of business. So looking for the first streaming partner now. I'm not sure if that will just fall to AMC or if they'll find another partner. But it's a really interesting time because we have like a show that's in the can. It's not affected by the strike. So if someone's looking for content, we're kind of like in a buyer's market right now, or a seller's market, I should say. That we have 2 seasons of science fiction ready to go to somebody. So I don't know where it might stream first. I'm glad that AMC is a partner, so they'll either get it all to themselves or get a piece of that, because I love working with them. But yeah, I don't pester them to find out, so I'll find out when you guys find out. I'll probably find out through someone sharing it on Facebook or something.
Well, that's pretty ballsy to do 2 seasons before it even airs. That's a gutsy move.
Yeah, I mean, it's economies of scale. They had the sets; they could shoot concurrently, and they really liked what they were building, and they thought, okay, it's going to take 2 seasons to tell this. So 2 seasons might be all we need or ever get, which is plenty for a shorter novel.
Well, Mr. Howey, hopefully you come back on when it's time to talk about that as well, and hopefully you can talk to me about things proceeding after the strikes are over.
I love that. Thanks for having me on.